The year was 1919, and the kitchen smelled of solder flux and ambition. Two young men, barely out of Navy uniforms, hunched over a wooden table in a Chicago bungalow at 1316 Carmen Avenue, threading copper wire through hand-cut bakelite panels with nothing but pliers, a screwdriver, and a soldering iron heated over the burner of a gas stove. Carl Hassel was 23. Ralph Matthews was 22. They had met at the Great Lakes Naval Training Station during the final months of the war, bonded over a shared obsession with radio signals, and decided that the invisible waves crackling through the winter air above Lake Michigan were worth building a life around. They called their two-man operation the Chicago Radio Laboratory, though the word laboratory overstated the case. The laboratory was a kitchen table. The staff was two men. The budget was essentially zero. Matthews's father, who worked for a printing company, produced their first catalogue for free, because as Hassel later put it, it did not cost us anything, or we would not have had a catalogue. I am telling you, we did not have any money. They built amateur radio equipment 12 sets at a time, each batch taking 2 to 3 weeks with the help of a third workman. By summer they had graduated from the kitchen table to half of a 14 by 18-foot garage at 5525 Sheridan Road near the Edgewater Beach Hotel on the lakefront. The other half of the garage housed their amateur broadcast station, call sign 9ZN, which they equipped with a synchronous rotary spark gap transmitter and a towering antenna. On December 4, 1919, Station 9ZN participated in the first post-war transcontinental message relay, and within a year it held the cross-country record of 6.5 minutes for a round-trip message. The signal was heard on every continent. The name Zenith itself was born from those famous call letters. At the suggestion of an employee, advertisements in QST magazine began listing 9ZN, followed by a small suffix, creating the trade name Zenith. Two radio operators in a rented garage had given themselves a name that meant the highest point. They did not know it yet, but they had also given themselves a prophecy, because once you name yourself after the summit, the only direction left is down. What transformed Chicago Radio Laboratory from a garage curiosity into an industrial empire was the arrival of a man who understood spectacle the way Hassel and Matthews understood circuits. Eugene Francis McDonald Jr. was a high school dropout from Syracuse, New York, who had moved to Chicago at 18 and talked his way into selling Franklin automobiles. His instinct for publicity bordered on pathological. He once drove a car up the steps of the General John Logan Memorial in Grant Park, with a photographer waiting at the top, and a policeman paid $10 to arrest him. By 1912, he had invented one of the first automobile credit financing companies and made himself a millionaire before his 30th birthday. During the war, he served in naval intelligence and emerged with the rank of lieutenant commander, a title he kept for life, insisting that colleagues, employees, and even his wife address him as the commander. He visited the garage around 1920, looking for someone to build a custom automobile radio, and found Hassel and Matthews working in what he described as a one-room shack, producing one set at a time, with a pile of orders a foot high but no capital to fill them. McDonald invested $30,000, and everything changed. On June 30, 1923, McDonald incorporated Zenith Radio Corporation with $500,000 in capital. He changed the trademark, added the lightning bolt logo, and unleashed a marketing campaign that no radio company had ever attempted. In 1925, he organized the Macmillan Arctic Expedition to the North Pole, equipped with Zenith shortwave transmitters, and broadcast Inuit voices singing into a microphone, sending them 12,000 miles to a receiver in Tasmania. He became the first president of the National Association of Broadcasters. He deliberately violated a Department of Commerce radio broadcast order just to create a test case that helped birth the Federal Radio Commission. And burning inside all this showmanship was a conviction that McDonald repeated until the day he died. Quality. Build it so well that people feel the difference in their hands, and they will never buy from anyone else. In 1927, the company adopted a slogan borrowed from a Chicago piano manufacturer. The quality goes in before the name goes on. It would remain Zenith's promise for 70 years. He did not see the slow erosion that his own success would invite. He was too busy building a cathedral. Before Zenith conquered the living room, it conquered the world one portable radio at a time. In 1924, the company introduced the first portable radio ever manufactured. In 1926, the first mass-produced home radio that ran on household current instead of batteries. But the product that sealed Zenith's reputation for indestructible quality was born from Commander McDonald's vanity. He wanted a multi-band portable radio for his yacht, the Mizpah, and in 1939 he ordered his chief engineer Gilbert Gustafson to build one to his exacting specifications. Gustafson submitted approximately 20 prototypes before McDonald approved a single design. The result was the Trans-Oceanic, a multi-band portable that weighed over 15 pounds and received signals from every corner of the globe. The first production model went on sale in 1942 at $75, with a sailboat embossed on its speaker grille. After Pearl Harbor, the sailboat was hastily replaced with a B-17 bomber. 35,000 units were built before wartime restrictions halted production, with roughly 100,000 unfilled orders left on the books. American soldiers carried Trans-Oceanics into every theater of combat, and the radio earned the title the royalty of radios. Various models remained in production until 1982, the last vacuum tube portable to be manufactured anywhere in the United States. McDonald's deafness in one ear, the result of an automobile accident, produced another unlikely legacy. Outraged that hearing aids cost 6 times more than a complete radio receiver, he launched the Ravox in 1939, a tabletop hearing aid priced at $29.50, when competitors charged $150 to $200. By 1964, Zenith's Arcadia model, developed with Texas Instruments, became the first consumer product in history to contain an integrated circuit. A radio company had quietly helped pioneer the microchip revolution years before anyone thought to call it that. By the middle of the 20th century, Zenith had become something more than a company. It had become a national reflex. When an American family in 1955 walked into an appliance store to buy their first television set, the name Zenith carried a gravitational pull that transcended advertising. It meant something had been built by hand, tested twice, and wrapped in wood that would darken and warm with the years the way good furniture does. The factory at 6001 West Dickens Avenue in Chicago's Belmont-Cragin neighborhood occupied 14 acres of industrial brick, 400,000 square feet of organized human effort, where 2,500 workers each day performed an act of engineering so intimate it was closer to craftsmanship than manufacturing. A second plant at 1500 North Costner Avenue housed another 2,100 workers building government electronics and transistors. The Rowland subsidiary in Melrose Park occupied 900,000 square feet, where 2,000 workers assembled the picture tubes that would glow in living rooms from Maine to California. The assembly lines ran the length of the building in parallel rivers of steel chassis and copper wire. Workers, many of them women who had been hired during the war and never left, sat at soldering stations performing point-to-point wiring by hand, threading connections between vacuum tube sockets, resistors, and capacitors with the kind of tactile precision that no machine could replicate. The air carried the sweet, acrid, slightly piney scent of rosin core solder flux, undercut by the mineral sharpness of heated metal and the warm electrical smell of transformers humming at 60 cycles. Testing stations lined the floor where technicians checked every receiver, every tuner, every picture tube before it left the building. At its peak, Zenith operated 7 Chicago area plants and employed 30,000 people across the country, generating nearly $978 million in revenue by 1975. The television sets that rolled off those lines were furniture as much as electronics. Golden Age Zenith consoles were encased in walnut, mahogany, cherry, or solid oak cabinets with carved moldings, bifold doors, and tapered Danish modern legs. Some models featured hinged lids that opened to reveal a turntable on one side and an 8-track player on the other. When you switched the set on, there was a pause, 30 to 60 seconds of warm-up time as the vacuum tubes came alive, and during that interval, the room filled with a scent no flat screen will ever produce: warm bakelite, solder flux, and dust burning off hot glass. The heavy VHF channel dial clicked through 13 positions with a satisfying mechanical authority, powered by 116 gold contact switches in 1964 models. A Zenith console weighed between 80 and 150 pounds. It was not an appliance. It was an anchor. It told the room that this family had taste, permanence, standards. Zenith was the last major American manufacturer to abandon hand-wired chassis for printed circuit boards, holding out years longer than its competitors because Commander McDonald and his engineers believed correctly that hand-soldered connections were more reliable. In 1969, the company's Chromacolor picture tube doubled image brightness by depositing black carbon between reduced-size phosphor dots, establishing a new performance benchmark for the entire industry. From 1972 to 1978, Zenith held outright market leadership in American color television sales. By 1960, Zenith and RCA each commanded more than 20% of the domestic market, with 25 other companies splitting the remainder. Every fourth television sold in America carried the lightning bolt. If you are still here, you are the kind of viewer this channel was built for. Hit subscribe, more stories like this are coming. And the innovations did not stop at the picture tube. Commander McDonald despised television commercials. He believed the viewer should control the experience, and that conviction produced one of Zenith's most transformative legacies. In 1950, the company released the Lazy Bones, a wired remote control that let viewers change channels without standing up. Consumers tripped over the cable. McDonald demanded something wireless. In 1955, engineer Eugene Polly, a former stockboy who had joined Zenith in 1935 and risen through the ranks on talent alone, invented the Flash-Matic, the world's first wireless television remote. Shaped like a snub-nosed green ray gun, it fired a beam of visible light at 4 photocells mounted in the corners of the screen. Advertisements invited Americans to shoot annoying commercials. The flaw was devastating. The Flash-Matic responded to all light sources, including sunlight streaming through a window. Only about 30,000 were produced. The solution came a year later from Dr. Robert Adler, an Austrian-born physicist who had fled the Nazi occupation and joined Zenith's research division in 1941. His Space Command remote used aluminum rods struck by spring-loaded hammers to produce ultrasonic tones, frequencies too high for human hearing, but powerful enough to trigger circuits inside the television. McDonald had insisted on a design that required no batteries, fearing customers would think the television was broken when batteries died. The device produced a distinctive mechanical sound when its buttons were pressed, a bright percussive note that earned it the nickname Americans still use today: the clicker. More than 9 million Space Command televisions were sold before infrared technology replaced ultrasonics in the early 1980s. An immigrant physicist had given America the power to silence its own living room from the comfort of a chair. Over the course of his career, he would accumulate a portfolio of inventions rivaling Thomas Edison in scope, filing patent after patent across disciplines that ranged from acoustics to optics to digital signal processing. He rarely sat in front of a screen himself, but beneath the surface of this golden prosperity, something fundamental was shifting, and the men running Zenith were so focused on perfecting their craft that they did not recognize the threat until it had already encircled them. In the early 1960s, 27 American companies manufactured television sets. By 1968, 9 had vanished. By 1988, only Zenith remained. The instrument of destruction was not market evolution, it was a coordinated assault. Japanese manufacturers, Matsushita, Sony, Toshiba, Hitachi, Sanyo, Sharp, and others, implemented a strategy that was elegant in its brutality. They fixed artificially high prices in Japan to generate monopoly profits, then used those profits to subsidize below-cost exports to the United States, a practice known as dumping that was authorized by Japan's Ministry of International Trade and Industry. A 5-company rule allegedly divided American customers among Japanese manufacturers to concentrate the damage on domestic competitors. The American companies fell not in a battle, but in an execution, one acquisition at a time, one factory closure at a time, each transaction individually rational and collectively catastrophic. Matsushita purchased Motorola's television division in 1974, laid off the American management, and began selling Japanese-made sets under the Quasar brand name. a domestic label masking foreign origin. Sanyo bought Warwick Electronics, the manufacturer behind the Sears Silvertone brand. Philips of the Netherlands absorbed Magnavox in 1974 and then swallowed Sylvania in 1981. General Electric purchased RCA in 1986, the most storied name in American broadcasting. The company that had pioneered commercial radio, built the first television network, and sent color into every living room in the nation, and immediately sold the combined consumer electronics business to Francis Thompson. David Sarnoff's empire traded to foreigners like surplus inventory. Dumont, which had launched the fourth American television network and given Jackie Gleason his first national stage, had been destroyed decades earlier by Paramount Pictures meddling and FCC allocations that strangled it in its cradle. Its archive of more than 20,000 episodes was allegedly loaded onto trucks and dumped into Upper New York Bay in the 1970s, one of the great cultural losses in broadcast history. By 1976, Japanese imports controlled 44% of the American color television market. By 1987, American and Japanese manufacturers stood at 29% each, a catastrophic reversal from the 60% American dominance that had existed just 5 years prior. Zenith fought back the only way it knew how. In December of 1970, the company joined Sears and Motorola in a massive antitrust lawsuit against 21 Japanese corporations, alleging a 2-decade conspiracy to destroy the American electronics industry through predatory pricing. The case dragged through the courts for 16 years, accumulating millions of pages of evidence and expert testimony. On March 26, 1986, the Supreme Court ruled 5-4 against Zenith, finding that a 20-year conspiracy among 21 companies was, in the majority's words, economically implausible. The dissent, written by Justice White and joined by 3 colleagues, argued the majority had ignored documented cartel activity and expert evidence. The decision raised the evidentiary bar for antitrust conspiracy claims to a height that made future cases nearly unwinnable. In April of 1987, the Supreme Court refused to revisit the ruling. 16 years of legal warfare ended in total defeat, and the last American television manufacturer stood alone with no allies, no legal remedy, and an industry that had been systematically dismantled around it. Research Vice President Robert Adler captured the corporate logic of surrender with a metaphor borrowed from survival itself. "If you are in a balloon drifting across the ocean," he said, "and you know there will be cannibals waiting when you reach land, if you start sinking, you still throw out everything, including the guns and ammunition, because if you do not get to shore, it will not matter if you have guns or not." The hemorrhaging was methodical. In 1977, Zenith laid off 5,600 workers, 25% of its American workforce, including more than 2,000 in Chicago alone. The loyalty programs that had prevented labor disputes for decades were eliminated. Half the research and development staff was cut, roughly 200 engineers dismissed. Workers protested outside the Daily Center. In 1982, the company posted its first net loss in nearly 50 years, $24 million, and failed to pay a dividend for the first time in half a century. Under CEO Jerry Perlman, Zenith diversified into personal computers through the 1979 acquisition of Heath Company, building Zenith Data Systems into a $1.4 billion business that captured a quarter of the American laptop market. It was not enough. Perlman called the era profitless prosperity, record television unit sales, generating margins so thin they vanished on contact with foreign price competition. Between 1985 and 1993, Zenith lost money in 8 of 9 years. The computer division was sold to France's Group Bull in 1989 for $511 million just to service the debt. A $100 million investment in factory robotics at the Melrose Park plant produced nothing but production delays and defective products. 3 CEOs cycled through in rapid succession. Losses mounted: $92 million in 1995, $178 million in 1996, $299 million in 1997, $275 million in 1998. The cruelest detail of all is that Zenith helped invent the technology that would define the future it would never see. In the late 1980s, Zenith engineers developed the VSB digital transmission system, that became the core of the ATSC digital television standard adopted by the FCC in December of 1996. They shipped their first high-definition television in August of 1999. The same month, they filed for bankruptcy. On July 18, 1995, LG Electronics of South Korea acquired 58% controlling interest in Zenith for $351 million. The Wall Street Journal ran the headline the country deserved to read. South Korean company seeks control of Zenith, last of the US TV makers. What LG wanted was not the factory, not the workers, not the assembly lines where women had soldered point-to-point connections for 4 decades. LG wanted the patents, the digital television technology, the brand recognition, the distribution network. Everything else was expendable. On August 23, 1999, Zenith filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. By November, it emerged as a wholly owned LG subsidiary. Every existing share of Zenith stock was cancelled, rendered worthless. Retirees who had held those shares for decades, workers who had participated in Commander McDonald's profit-sharing program and rolled their earnings into company stock, watched their savings evaporate in a single legal filing. The last American picture tube plant at Melrose Park, where 1,700 union workers had once assembled cathode ray tubes inside a facility spanning nearly 1 million square feet of industrial space, went dark. An industry analyst delivered the epitaph without ceremony. "It is not economic to run this factory," he said, "has not been for several years." There was no way that any rational person would have kept Melrose Park open. Employment fell from 32,000 at the start of the decade to fewer than 7,000 by the end. Chicago Public Radio produced a documentary called A Big Time Hurt, interviewing former workers on the anniversary of the closure. On online forums, the children of Zenith employees left their own testimonials. "My parents met at Zenith," one wrote. Another remembered a father who started before the Depression, was laid off during it, returned after, and eventually became union president. These were not job losses. They were amputations from a community's identity. In 2017, the original Belmont Cragin factory, the 14-acre birthplace of the lightning bolt, caught fire 3 times in a single year. The August blaze sent flames shooting through the roof, prompting emergency demolition motions from the city. The building had sat abandoned for more than 2 decades, its windows shattered, its brick facades stained with smoke and weather, the floors littered with debris that no one would ever sweep. Where 2,500 workers had once filled the air with the sizzle of solder and the clatter of steel chassis moving down the line, there was only wind pushing through broken glass. Where the scent of rosin flux and warm bakelite had once hung in every corridor, there was only damp concrete and the chemical tang of neglect. Where testing stations had hummed with the glow of cathode ray tubes being brought to life for the first time, there was only darkness. In October of 2021, the Cook County Land Bank Authority sold the entire property for $20,000. A factory that once kept thousands of Americans employed and produced the finest consumer electronics in the Western Hemisphere, sold for the price of a second-hand sedan. Zenith Electronics, LLC, still exists on paper. It occupies 50,000 square feet of leased office space in Lincolnshire, Illinois, where a small team maintains digital rights management technology for hotel television systems. The Glenview headquarters was demolished in 2018. The Melrose Park plant was torn down, and the contaminated ground required environmental remediation. The brand appeared on digital converter boxes during the 2009 transition and then largely vanished from American retail. What Zenith lost was never just a company, it was a category. In 1949, 105 American firms manufactured television sets. Today the number is 0. RCA, Admiral, Philco, Magnavox, Motorola, Dumont, Westinghouse, Emerson, Sylvania, every single name that once defined how Americans saw the world through a glowing screen, either ceased to exist or became a hollow trademark stamped on products assembled 10,000 miles from the factory floors where they were born. Chicago alone shed more than 300,000 industrial jobs between 1970 and 1996. West Side neighborhoods that once thrived in the orbit of factories like Zenith, Schwinn, and Brax Candy experienced cascading collapse Rising crime, deteriorating housing, vanishing services, each manufacturing job carrying a multiplier of up to 7 additional positions into oblivion with it. When did we decide that it was acceptable to lose an entire industry? Not through competition, not through innovation, but through coordinated predatory pricing that our own Supreme Court called implausible, while 4 dissenting justices pointed at the evidence and said the majority had simply refused to look. The United States government assigned 1 overburdened Treasury official to administer the nation's countervailing duty laws, while Japanese manufacturers hired 20 former government officials as lobbyists. That is not a market failure. That is a policy choice dressed in the language of inevitability. Commander McDonald died of cancer on May 15, 1958, at 72. Within weeks, his longtime engineering partner Gustafson also died, and colleagues later reflected that McDonald's death left a void of talent at the top that the company never filled. His son, Eugene III, born in 1942, died in 1965 from a gunshot wound in Arizona. The sheriff's office ruled it suicide. A coroner's jury disagreed. Carl Hassel, the quiet co-founder who served as chief engineer for more than 40 years, retired in 1966 and died in 1975 without fanfare. The kind of man whose genius lived in solder joints and circuit diagrams rather than headlines. Eugene Polly, the stock boy who pioneered wireless television control, spent 47 years at Zenith and felt he was never properly credited for the device that changed how humanity interacts with technology. Robert Adler received the recognition, the awards, the National Inventors Hall of Fame induction that eluded Polly. He died in 2012 at 96, a man who gave the world a revolution and watched someone else receive the credit. Robert Adler, whose ultrasonic clicker became the most influential consumer interface device before the touchscreen, filed his last patent application for touchscreen technology in October of 2006. He died 4 months later at 93. He held nearly 200 patents. He rarely watched television. What does it mean that the man who gave America the power to control its living room from an armchair could not bring himself to sit in front of the screen he helped perfect? The Zenith name still exists, but the empire that earned it, the hand-wired chassis and the walnut cabinets, the factory floor thick with flux and purpose, the 30,000 workers whose labor was once synonymous with American quality, is gone, replaced by leased office space and a licensing agreement. And we are poorer for the trade. Somewhere in an attic in the Midwest, inside a cardboard box that has not been opened in decades, there sits a Space Command remote control. Its 4 aluminum rods are still perfectly tuned. Its spring-loaded hammers still carry the potential for that bright mechanical note, the one that gave it the name Americans still remember. Pick it up and you can feel the heft of it. The cool aluminum housing, the satisfying resistance of those 4 raised buttons, each one a tiny act of mechanical engineering that needed no power source, no software, no updates, no subscription. It was built to outlast the television it controlled, and it did. But there is no television left in this country that can hear it. The frequency has gone silent. And in that silence lives the cost of every decision, every lawsuit, every factory closure, every trade concession that America made while telling itself the market would sort things out. The market sorted things out. It sorted Zenith into a box in an attic and the rest of us into a world where the quality no longer goes in, because the name no longer goes on anything made by American hands.